To this week's episode of Jet Lag in the News. I'm Steve Jasper, aka the Jet Lag Guy. I apologise I didn't podcast last week. I was dealing with an injury. So let's get right into it. Let's start off with some research. The big news in research is that the association has made a statement about the use of melatonin, and I'm going to quote it directly so there's no mistakes. Quote, a review of 5 years of health records for more than 130,000 adults with insomnia who had used melatonin for at least a year found that they were more likely to be diagnosed with heart failure, require hospitalization for the condition, or die from any cause. The association between melatonin and the increased risk of heart failure or death found in this study, which cannot prove a cause and effect relationship, raises safety concerns about the use of melatonin. End of quote. In a study out of Turkey in 618 healthy university students, researchers found that, quote, evening chronotype, irregular meal timing, and predominantly lower eating awareness were independently linked to poorer dietary patterns, adverse eating behaviours, and increased risk in young adults. End of quote. Which leads to the question, is your jet lag making you fat? Also out of Turkey, this is the first time I've had two Turkey banners in a row. A possible link has been found between circadian rhythm or sleep disturbances and neurodegenerative markers. Neurodegenerative meaning related to nerve disease. The study had 30 night shift healthcare workers as the subject group and 29 daytime workers as the control group. So it's a fairly small study, but one worth investigating more. It does seem that every week I get a new terrible effect of circadian misalignment, which includes jet lag, of course, landing on my desk. Out of Japan, there was a study conducted in mice, so it may not necessarily apply to humans, but mice exposed to circadian disruption, quote, exhibited significant reductions in grip strength and muscle weight relative to the control group of mice who didn't have circadian disruption, and the mice exposed to circadian disruption also showed markers leading to a type of cancer called sarcopenia. Again, this is research in mice. It's very early stage research. It may not play out in humans, but again, it's worth watching. Research is being conducted into the effect of traffic noise and sleep disruption, as many business travellers are exposed to noise when they travel. My own memories of travelling to San Francisco and hearing lots of sirens in the downtown area, so this is certainly relevant for business travellers. And finally, in research, several years ago, I wrote an academic paper on the effect of jet lag on Olympic medal counts. And my work was cited in the Academy of Management Journal by an article about baseball umpires and time zones. I've put up the QR code if you're interested, and my paper is in the list of references. Over to business travel now. The US federal government shutdown appears to be ending at the time of production. It may not, at his last 40 days, which is the longest in record. The Federal Aviation Administration had previously instructed airlines to cut 6% of flights by Tuesday, which is today in American time, and to 20% if the shutdown persisted. There was a near miss at Los Angeles International Airport when two passenger planes almost collided, although thankfully nobody was killed or injured. We're all very grateful for that, of course, but it does highlight the potential added danger of flying to, from, or within the United States at the moment. In one day, more than 2,800 flights were cancelled domestically within the United States. The shutdown does appear to be ending at the time of recording, which is good news for business travellers. Let's go to happy news. I'm talking about Project Sunrise, where, quote, Qantas expects to begin a world-first direct non-stop 22-hour flights from Sydney to London and New York in the first half of 2027. The Dreamliner planes will have a wellbeing zone for exercise because you absolutely can't sit still for 22 hours because of the risk of deep vein thrombosis. And the Dreamliner also has circadian rhythm-friendly lighting, which is something I find exciting. Some not so good news for Qantas, as someone's power bank exploded in their pocket and about 150 people were evacuated from Melbourne Airport Business Lounge. The passenger whose power bank received some burns on his leg and fingers, and there was smoke in the lounge. Last podcast, I mentioned that Virgin Australia was quietly reviewing its power bank policies, and I suspect Qantas may well do the same. Here's some better news about Qantas, with an upgrade of its business lounge at Sydney Airport. The upgrade will feature a 150 square metre outdoor terrace for passengers to soak up that Sydney sunshine, which will also help them with their jet lag. Also in Sydney, the new Western Sydney International Airport had its first passenger jet land. The landing was a test for an emergency response to a simulated aircraft incident. Unlike the current Sydney Airport, there will not be a curfew, which will make it a lot more convenient to land there. I know that flying from Melbourne, I have a cut-off, and if I have any meetings or work in the evenings, I cannot fly to Sydney that evening because of the curfew. So to quote Western Sydney International Airport, bring on the first half of 2026. Also regarding Western Sydney International Airport, let's just show that harbour bridge again. There will be a new metro service running from St Mary's Station on Sydney's T1 Western Line, and the Blue Mountain services, which intercity services, currently do not stop at St Mary's. Penrith City Council and the local state member are pushing hard for St Mary's to be added as a stop for these express trains, and I completely support this initiative. I think this will be a vital link in connectivity to have Western Sydney Airport connected not only to Parramatta and onto the city centre of Sydney, but also to the Blue Mountains, where I'd imagine large numbers of airport users would come from. Over to sport.
Now, over to
I did
sport,
a series
and
of
I
promo
don't have a
videos.
lot of sport this week.
Over to sport.
But
I did a series
one
of
thing I
promo
do
videos
have.
at the Melbourne Cup last week. This year, a local horse, Half Yours, won, ridden by Jamie Melham, the second female jockey ever to win the race that stops the nation. As Jamie approached the podium, the first female jockey to win the Melbourne Cup, Michelle Payne, greeted her with the words, "Welcome to the club." With the local horse winning, perhaps jet lag was a factor in this year's Melbourne Cup. Over now to Azerbaijan. Chelsea Football Club is playing in Baku, Azerbaijan, which is 4 hours ahead of the UK in terms of time zones. But the team and support staff are staying on UK time, which is actually quite a smart strategy for short trips such as this one. Quote, "The players and staff are expected to stay on UK time while they are in Azerbaijan, effectively having breakfast while the locals eat their lunch." So great work, Chelsea. And finally, I knew people could be affected by jet lag, but I didn't know monuments could. The Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne, which is a short distance from where I am, originally had a beam of sunlight placed on the Bible verse, "Greater love hath no man," in the building at 11 a.m. on the 11th month, day of the 11th month. That was the architect design. That was yesterday. That commemorates the signing of the armistice at the end of World War I. Daylight savings time has messed this up, and so there's been a setup with some mirrors involving that. Here's the QR code for Julian O'Shea's video on this subject if you're interested. November is Australian Music Month, and I'll be publishing a top 10 list of my favourite Australian songs. Will they have a jet lag theme? Is that even a question? Of course they will. So look forward to that over the next few days. Finally, I've had an article on chronodiversity, whether you're an owl or a fowl, published in RBV Quarterly. It's about maximising your productivity according to your individual body clock. Here's the QR code if you're interested. If you have any questions or want to know more about what I do, check out my website at www.jetlagguy.com.au. There's another book on the way, and you'll be the first to know when it's released. And that's this week's, or should I say fortnight's, Jet Lag in the News. I'm Steve Jasper, aka the Jet Lag Guy. Thank you for watching.